What if everything you thought you knew about ancient power, family, and survival was a lie? Imagine a world where the lines between love and manipulation, loyalty and betrayal, were not just blurred, but completely erased by a thirst for absolute control. This isn't a fictional drama. This is the untold, horrifying truth behind one of history's most enigmatic figures, Cleopatra II. You've heard of the legendary Cleopatra II, but her namesake, Cleopatra II, presided over a dynasty so depraved, so utterly consumed by its own insatiable appetites, that it makes the most shocking modern headlines pale in comparison. For too long, her story has been relegated to dusty footnotes, overshadowed by the more famous queen. But the secrets she held, the unspeakable acts committed in the name of power, are far more chilling, far more complex, and ultimately far more relevant than any sanitized version of history would have you believe. In the next 20 minutes, we will rip back the veil on a reign steeped in incest, treachery, and bloodshed, a saga that defies belief and challenges every notion of human decency. We'll expose the shocking reality of a queen who, to secure her throne and protect her lineage, married her own brother, Ptolemy VI, then, in a twist of fate even more macabre, was forced into a union with her own son, Ptolemy VIII. This wasn't romance. It was a desperate, brutal game of thrones played out within the confines of a single, incestuous family. How did a woman navigate such a treacherous landscape? What unholy alliances did she forge, and what unspeakable sacrifices did she make to survive in a court where trust was a fatal weakness and family was the deadliest weapon? We will uncover the hidden machinations, the calculated murders, and the terrifying psychological toll of living in a world where your closest relatives were your most dangerous enemies. Prepare to confront the dark heart of a dynasty, a story so shocking, so utterly devoid of moral boundaries, that it will forever change how you view power, family, and the terrifying lengths to which some will go to claim a crown. This is the true story of Cleopatra II, a queen whose reign was written in blood and betrayal, and whose legacy remains a chilling testament to the darkest chapters of human history. The year is 170 BC, and the grand city of Alexandria, a beacon of Hellenistic culture, is simmering with a silent tension. Within its opulent palace walls, Cleopatra II, a woman of formidable intellect and striking beauty, found herself caught in a web of familial duty and burgeoning ambition. Her life, meticulously planned since birth, revolved around the Ptolemaic dynasty, a lineage known for its brilliance, its debauchery, and its chilling penchant for incestuous unions. Cleopatra too understood this tradition not as a perversion, but as a sacred means to preserve the purity of their divine bloodline, a necessary sacrifice for the stability of Egypt. From a young age, Cleopatra too had been groomed for power. She had witnessed the intricate dance of alliances and betrayals, the subtle shifts in power that could elevate or annihilate a royal. Her education was rigorous, encompassing not just the arts of diplomacy and governance, but also the ruthless pragmatism required to survive in a court where loyalty was a fleeting commodity. She was a keen observer, learning to read the nuances in a whispered conversation, to detect the hidden motives behind a seemingly benevolent smile. This keenness, however, would soon be tested by a challenge far greater than any she had anticipated. Her destiny, as dictated by tradition, was to marry her brother, Ptolemy VI Philometor. He was not just her sibling. He was her co-ruler, and their union was meant to solidify their reign, to present a united front to both their people and the encroaching Roman Republic. Cleopatra too accepted this fate with a quiet resolve. She understood the political imperative, the need for a seamless transition of power, and the symbolic strength of their shared lineage. Yet, beneath this stoic acceptance, a subtle unease began to stir. The central conflict that would soon consume Cleopatra II and her world was not merely the political maneuvering of rival nations, but the insidious decay within her own family. The Ptolemaic court, for all its splendor, was a viper's nest of ambition, jealousy, and a chilling disregard for human life when power was at stake. The very traditions meant to strengthen their rule, the intermarriage, the absolute authority, also created fertile ground for internal strife. Cleopatra too knew, deep in her heart, that the greatest threat to her reign would come not from without, but from within the gilded cage of her own family. The emotional stakes for Cleopatra II were profoundly personal. Her very survival and the future of her beloved Egypt hinged on her ability to navigate this treacherous landscape. She was not just a queen. She was a sister, a wife, and soon, a mother, with the weight of an ancient empire resting squarely on her shoulders. The stage was set, the players in place, and Cleopatra II, with her sharp mind and an increasingly hardened spirit, prepared for a struggle that would define her legacy. The fragile peace of Alexandria, already strained by the whispers of court intrigue, shattered with the arrival of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Seleucid king. His armies, a formidable tide of bronze and iron, swept through Egypt, bypassing the border defenses with chilling ease. For Cleopatra, this was not just a geopolitical crisis. It was a deeply personal affront, a direct challenge to the very foundation of her family's rule. She had been raised to believe in the inviolability of their divine lineage, yet here was a foreign king, trampling over their sacred lands, threatening to dismantle everything she held dear. The initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, calculated determination. Cleopatra, still a young woman, found herself thrust into the crucible of war, forced to confront the harsh realities of power beyond the gilded cage of the palace. The traditional Ptolemaic strategy of internal consolidation, perfected over generations, proved woefully inadequate against the external threat posed by Antiochus. Her brother, Ptolemy VI, though her co-ruler, seemed paralyzed by indecision, his youthful optimism crumbling under the weight of the invasion. This forced Cleopatra to step forward, to assert her own will in a court accustomed to male dominance. She observed the unfolding disaster with a keen, analytical mind, her earlier education in diplomacy now proving invaluable. The swiftness of Antiochus's advance, the ruthlessness of his tactics, painted a stark picture of their vulnerability. Alexandria, once a symbol of impregnable power, now felt like a besieged fortress. The city's opulent markets, usually bustling with merchants and scholars, became hushed, filled with an unspoken fear. Cleopatra understood that their survival depended not just on military might, but on a shrewd understanding of political maneuvering, a skill she was rapidly honing. The invasion exposed the inherent weaknesses within the Ptolemaic court, revealing the cracks in its seemingly solid facade. Loyalty, once assumed, now wavered. Advisors, who had once offered confident counsel, now stammered with uncertainty. Cleopatra watched, absorbed, and learned. She saw how fear could twist men's allegiances, how desperation could drive them to betrayal. This period of intense pressure forged something new within her, a steely resolve, an unyielding pragmatism that would define her future actions. The culmination of Antiochus's campaign was swift and brutal. He marched directly on Alexandria, laying siege to the very heart of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Cleopatra, from within the besieged walls, could hear the distant clang of siege engines, the shouts of the invading army. The city, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. The threat was no longer abstract. It was immediate, palpable. The purity of her bloodline, the stability of Egypt, everything she had been taught to protect, now hung precariously in the balance. This was not just a battle for territory. It was a fight for the very soul of her dynasty, a fight Cleopatra knew she could not afford to lose. The purity of her bloodline, the stability of Egypt, everything Cleopatra had been taught to protect, now hung precariously in the balance. This was not just a battle for territory. It was a fight for the very soul of her dynasty, a fight Cleopatra knew she could not afford to lose. The very air within the palace seemed to thicken with unspoken anxieties. Cleopatra, ever the pragmatist, understood that the looming Roman threat was more than just a military challenge. It was a test of her leadership, her cunning, and her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of international politics. She spent countless hours poring over maps, dispatching trusted scouts to gather intelligence, and engaging in hushed, late-night discussions with her most loyal advisors. Every piece of information, every rumor, was meticulously weighed and analyzed. Cleopatra knew that a misstep, a single error in judgment, could spell ruin not only for her, but for the entire Ptolemaic legacy. The weight of centuries of pharaohs rested on her young shoulders, a burden that would crush a lesser woman. Yet, Cleopatra bore it with an almost terrifying resolve. Her brother-husband, Ptolemy VI Philometor, while a figurehead of their shared rule, often seemed distant, his focus more on scholarly pursuits than the grim realities of war. Cleopatra found herself increasingly taking the reins, making the difficult decisions, and projecting an image of unwavering strength to her people. She walked through the grand halls of Alexandria, her head held high, her gaze steady, a living embodiment of the dynasty's resilience. But beneath this regal exterior, a storm brewed. The Roman legions, relentless and disciplined, pushed further into Egyptian territory. News of their advance arrived daily, each report a fresh wound to the pride of Egypt. Cleopatra felt the frustration gnawing at her, the helplessness of watching her kingdom shrink under the relentless Roman tide. She understood the strategic implications of every lost city, every besieged fortress. The resources of Egypt, vast as they were finite, and the Roman war machine seemed inexhaustible. A desperate plan began to form in Cleopatra's mind, a gamble so audacious it could either save her dynasty or hasten its demise. It was a plan born of necessity, forged in the crucible of despair, and it would demand a sacrifice far greater than any she had yet considered. This was a path fraught with peril, a razor's edge between triumph and utter annihilation, but Cleopatra saw no other choice. The survival of her family, the preservation of the Ptolemaic name, depended on her willingness to make the ultimate wager. She would face the Romans, not on the battlefield, but in the treacherous arena of diplomacy, where words could be sharper than swords and alliances more fragile than glass. Cleopatra understood the stakes. The weight of her dynasty, the very essence of Egypt's future, rested squarely on her shoulders. She had navigated the treacherous currents of court intrigue, had weathered the storms of familial betrayal, but this was different. This was Rome, a power whose shadow stretched across the known world, a force that bent empires to its will. Cleopatra knew that to face them on their terms, in their arena, demanded not just courage, but an almost superhuman cunning. Her strategy was meticulously crafted, a delicate tapestry woven with threads of charm, intellect, and an unwavering resolve. Cleopatra would not arrive as a supplicant, begging for mercy. She would present herself as an equal, a sovereign ruler negotiating with another. Every gesture, every word, every calculated silence would be a move in this high-stakes game. She prepared for weeks, poring over ancient texts, studying Roman law and custom, dissecting their political vulnerabilities. Cleopatra understood that knowledge was her greatest weapon, and she intended to wield it with devastating precision. The journey to Rome was a stark departure from the familiar opulence of Alexandria. The sea voyage was long, the Roman air crisp and unfamiliar. Yet, with each passing mile, Cleopatra's determination solidified. She felt the eyes of history upon her, the echoes of her ancestors urging her forward. Upon her arrival, the Roman Senate, a formidable assembly of hardened politicians, awaited her. Their faces were etched with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and a thinly veiled arrogance. They saw her as a foreign queen, perhaps a novelty, certainly not an equal. Cleopatra felt their dismissive gazes, but she allowed no flicker of apprehension to cross her features. She entered the Senate chamber, not with a retinue of armed guards, but with a quiet dignity, her presence commanding attention without a single word. Cleopatra's eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept across the faces of the senators, assessing each one, searching for any hint of weakness or susceptibility. She knew this was her moment, the culmination of years of preparation, the ultimate test of her will. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the weight of empires hanging in the balance. Cleopatra drew a slow, steady breath, preparing to speak, knowing that her very survival, and that of her beloved Egypt, depended on the words she was about to utter. This was not merely diplomacy. It was a battle of wits, a fight for the very soul of her nation, and Cleopatra was ready for war. Cleopatra's voice, though soft, carried the weight of generations, each word a carefully placed stone in a fortress of logic and veiled threat. She spoke not of peace, but of consequence, outlining with chilling precision the inevitable chaos that would engulf both their kingdoms if the current aggressions persisted. Her eyes, usually pools of serene intelligence, now shimmered with an unyielding resolve, reflecting the flickering torchlight in the chamber. She detailed the intricate web of alliances Egypt had cultivated, the vast resources at her disposal, and the unwavering loyalty of her people. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, delivered with the grace of a queen and the cunning of a seasoned general. The air in the chamber grew thick with unspoken tension. The foreign envoy, initially dismissive, shifted uneasily, his carefully constructed facade of indifference beginning to crack. He had underestimated Cleopatra, mistaking her youth and beauty for weakness. He had expected pleas, perhaps even tears, but instead, he faced a mind as sharp as any blade, a will as unyielding as the desert stone. Cleopatra did not raise her voice, did not resort to histrionics. She simply laid bare the stark reality of their predicament, forcing him to confront the potential devastation of his own making. She spoke of the granaries overflowing with grain, the Nile's bounty ensuring their self-sufficiency, contrasting it with the precarious supply lines of an invading army. Cleopatra highlighted the resilience of the Egyptian people, forged through centuries of foreign domination and internal strife, reminding him that they were not easily subjugated. She painted a vivid picture of a protracted, bloody conflict, one that would bleed both nations dry and leave them vulnerable to other opportunistic powers. The envoy, a man accustomed to blunt force and overt displays of power, found himself disarmed by her quiet authority, her intellectual dominance. As Cleopatra concluded, a profound silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the torches. The envoy, his face now etched with a newfound respect, understood the gravity of her message. This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum, delivered with such eloquent precision that it left no room for misinterpretation. He saw not just a queen, but a protector, a formidable guardian of her realm. The battle of wits was over, and Cleopatra had emerged victorious, not through brute force, but through the sheer power of her intellect and her unshakable will. The future of Egypt, for now, was secure, held firmly in the hands of its brilliant queen. The whispers of peace finally settled over Alexandria, a fragile quiet bought at great cost. Cleopatra, standing on the balcony overlooking the bustling port, felt the weight of her crown shift from a burden to a mantle of triumph. She had navigated the treacherous currents of familial betrayal, faced down the specter of invasion, and emerged not merely intact, but stronger, more resolute. The victory over her brother, a victory of intellect and strategic brilliance rather than brute force, solidified her position not just as a queen, but as a formidable ruler in her own right. The years that followed were a testament to Cleopatra's unwavering vision. She embarked on an ambitious program of reform, revitalizing Egypt's economy and strengthening its diplomatic ties. Granaries overflowed, trade routes flourished, and the cultural institutions of Alexandria once again shone brightly, attracting scholars and artists from across the known world. Cleopatra understood that true power lay not just in military might, but in prosperity and stability, a lesson she had learned through bitter experience. Her reign became a golden age, a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity for the Ptolemaic kingdom. Yet, even in triumph, Cleopatra carried the scars of her past. The deep-seated trauma of familial betrayal, the constant vigilance required to maintain power, had etched lines of wisdom and weariness onto her face. She had sacrificed personal happiness for the sake of her kingdom, choosing the path of duty above all else. The love she had once yearned for was replaced by the unwavering devotion of her people, a different kind of fulfillment, but a profound one nonetheless. Cleopatra had become a legend in her own time, a ruler whose name resonated with power, intelligence, and an unyielding will. Her legacy was not merely one of survival, but of transformation. Cleopatra had taken a dynasty teetering on the brink of collapse and forged it into a beacon of strength and influence. She had proven that a woman, in a world dominated by men, could not only rule, but could excel, shaping the destiny of a nation with her intellect and courage. The intricate web of alliances and betrayals, the subtle shifts in power that had once threatened to consume her, had ultimately served to hone her into the formidable queen she became. As Cleopatra looked out at the setting sun casting long shadows across the city, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The battle for Egypt's soul had been won, and she, Cleopatra, the survivor, the strategist, the queen, had been its champion. Her story, etched into the annals of history, would forever stand as a testament to the enduring power of a woman who dared to defy expectations and carve her own destiny. The Ptolemaic dynasty, for a time, found its greatest protector in her, a queen who had mastered the art of survival and the science of true leadership. Cleopatra, a name once synonymous with power and ruthlessness, found her reign ending not with a bang, but a slow, agonizing whimper. The very machinations she had perfected, the betrayal she had mastered, ultimately became her undoing. Her relentless pursuit of control, first over her brother, then her own son, had carved a path of destruction through her family and her kingdom. The once unbreakable will that had allowed her to navigate the treacherous currents of Ptolemaic politics finally buckled under the weight of her own choices. Her final years were a stark contrast to the vibrant, ambitious queen who had once dominated the Alexandrian court. The cunning that had served her so well in youth had curdled into paranoia, alienating even those few allies who remained. The constant fear of plots, real or imagined, consumed her, a fitting end for a life built on suspicion and preemption. She had sought to eliminate every rival, every potential threat, only to find herself isolated in a kingdom she had bled dry. The very ambition that had propelled her to the throne ultimately became the chains that bound her. The story of Cleopatra is a chilling testament to the corrupting nature of absolute power. She began her reign as a young woman thrust into a world of cutthroat politics, forced to adapt or perish. Yet, in her ruthless ascent, she transcended mere survival, becoming a force of nature driven by an insatiable hunger for dominance. Her journey, from a besieged princess to an unchallengeable queen, then to a paranoid tyrant, illustrates a tragic descent. The crown, once a symbol of her triumph, became a heavy burden weighing down her soul, with the ghosts of those she had sacrificed. In the end, Cleopatra's legacy was not one of glory, but a stark warning etched in the annals of a dynasty consumed by its own dark heart. Her reign, a tapestry woven with incest, betrayal, and blood, finally unraveled, leaving behind only the chilling echoes of a queen who ruled absolutely, and ultimately, alone.